Greetings to all our viewers tuning in to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that might seem like just another distant conflict on the far side of the globe. But in reality, it vividly mirrors the quiet shifts in global power dynamics that are reshaping our world. This is a story where colossal aircraft carriers cut through the waters of the Caribbean, where hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan troops have been placed on high alert, and where Washington claims a war on drugs, yet stands accused of opening up an entirely new front. This isn't merely a confrontation between the US and Venezuela. It's a story of fear, calculation, and grand ambitions in an era when every nation, strong or weak, is struggling to find its place in an unrelenting power struggle. In the past 24 hours, the Caribbean Sea has unexpectedly become the center of global attention. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most powerful aircraft carrier with over 4,000 sailors, dozens of fighter jets, and a strike system capable of altering the balance of any region it enters, has suddenly made its appearance. Its presence is not just a military event, it is a declaration cast in steel. The United States is now looking at the Caribbean with a seriousness rarely seen. And without a moment's hesitation, Venezuela reacted as though it had heard the approaching footsteps of a looming threat. Nearly 200,000 soldiers were placed on high alert. Ground, sea, and air forces simultaneously entered combat-ready status. From the night of November 11th through to the end of the 12th, Venezuela launched emergency military drills across the country. This wasn't a show of force. It was the genuine defense posture of a nation that has faced external pressure time and again, and that knows all too well how even the smallest misstep could plunge it into chaos. The atmosphere in Caracas has grown heavy, like the air before a storm. On social media, President Nicolas Maduro issued a defiant declaration: "We are ready to defend the homeland on every terrain and under any circumstance." The world knows very well that when a head of state speaks like this, it means the threat they're facing is all too real. So what has pushed tensions in the Caribbean to such a breaking point? Why has Washington deployed the world's largest aircraft carrier? And is America's stated mission really what it claims to be? The answer lies right before us. Starting from the moment the USS Gerald R. Ford silently cut through the waters of the Caribbean under the banner of a counter-narcotics mission. But the question is, dear viewers, is this truly just a campaign against crime? Or is there something larger, deeper, and far more troubling quietly unfolding behind the scenes? The arrival of the USS Gerald R. Ford in the Caribbean is no coincidence, nor is it merely a display of raw military power. This aircraft carrier was originally stationed in Europe, where it served as a deterrent against flashpoints in the Atlantic. But with a single, brief order from the White House, its course was dramatically altered, rushing straight into the waters that lie between two continents. Washington has stated that this is part of a large-scale anti-drug operation aimed at dismantling transcontinental cocaine trafficking networks. On paper, the objective sounds perfectly legitimate, but, dear viewers, when a supercarrier with overwhelming offensive capability is deployed to such a sensitive region, the world has every right to ask, is drug trafficking alone enough to justify this? Since September, the U.S. has carried out at least 19 attacks targeting vessels it claims were smuggling narcotics. Over 70 people have died in clashes between U.S. Coast Guard ships and small boats offshore. Venezuela has rejected all accusations, insisting this is merely a pretext, an excuse for Washington to tighten its grip and pave the way for a military intervention with regime change undertones. What further complicates the situation is the reaction from the UK, America's closest ally. While Washington maintains that it's carrying out a mission for global security, London has announced a temporary halt to intelligence sharing, citing a reluctance to be drawn into controversial military operations. A brief statement, but one that casts a long shadow of doubt. If even your closest friend is hesitant, perhaps the so-called anti-drug mission isn't as simple as the US claims. To better understand the stakes, we need to look at the map. The Caribbean isn't just a picturesque sea dotted with sunlit islands. It's a strategic gateway for the entire Western Hemisphere, a crossroads through which vital energy, trade, and military routes all converge. Whoever controls the Caribbean doesn't just hold sway over Venezuela, but also Central America, South America, and part of the crucial maritime corridor connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For the United States, the Caribbean is its southern shield, the first line of defense protecting the homeland. For Venezuela, the presence of the USS Gerald R just off its shores feels like a giant pitching a tent right at their doorstep. And when that giant brings along destroyers, cruisers, and dozens of combat aircraft, no country could possibly see it as anything but a direct threat. In recent days, Venezuela's radar systems have constantly picked up U.S. aircraft in the skies. The warships escorting the Ford form a net spanning the entire Caribbean Sea, like a massive shadow cast over the region. The atmosphere has turned suffocating, and every signal over the radio is scrutinized by both sides, as if any transmission could be the spark that ignites something far bigger. Why has the U.S. chosen this moment? The answer may lie in domestic turbulence, a government under pressure, a deeply polarized political landscape, and a growing need to project strength to the electorate. A military operation beyond the nation's borders, even one dressed in the cloak of a drug war, can serve as the tough image required. But that strategy places the entire Caribbean in a precarious position. Some analysts believe the U.S. is testing Venezuela's response. Others argue that Washington is sending a message to Russia, a country that has openly supported Caracas for years. Whatever the reason, one truth remains undeniable. With the arrival of the USS Gerald R. the once calm waters of the Caribbean have been stirred. And that is precisely why Venezuela now sees no choice but to prepare for the worst-case scenario. When a nation feels the breath of a superpower right at its doorstep, the instinctive reaction is to close ranks, mobilize its forces, and elevate its alert to the highest level. That was the moment Caracas launched its large-scale military drills, mobilizing nearly 200,000 troops and deploying tactics it calls modern guerrilla warfare. And from this point on, dear viewers, the story enters a whole new chapter, one where Venezuela no longer defends itself with words, but with real military action. Venezuela's response was so swift, it stunned the entire world. Just hours after the USS Gerald R. appeared in the Caribbean, Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez immediately announced that the entire armed forces would be placed on high alert. Not just a partial mobilization, not a symbolic exercise. He made it clear. Nearly 200,000 troops would take part in an emergency nationwide drill across jungles, mountains, cities, and especially along the coastal areas directly facing the U.S. presence. What drew the most attention wasn't the size of the force, but the speed of the response. Venezuela moved as if they had a scenario prepared long in advance, just waiting for the right signal to trigger it. This suggests that Caracas believes the U.S. presence this time isn't merely a warning or a show of force. It could be the opening act of a much larger military campaign. President Nicolas Maduro's government is well aware of the looming threat of intervention, something that has cast a long shadow over Latin America's turbulent history. Amid the roar of live-fire exercises and the growl of armored vehicles kicking up red dust, Venezuela revealed a detail that caught the attention of Western analysts. They are prepared to deploy what they call modern guerrilla warfare. For a country with a regular army of over 120,000 troops, complete with tanks, surface-to-air missiles, and fighter jets, choosing a tactic traditionally used by vastly outgunned forces says a great deal. It speaks volumes. Caracas understands that a direct confrontation with the U.S. would be unsustainable if open conflict breaks out. So they're preparing for a war that the U.S. would find far more difficult, a prolonged, asymmetrical, decentralized conflict. Venezuela is mobilizing the Bolivarian militias, a vast, locally organized force capable of rapidly dispersing and operating effectively in urban areas, mountains, forests, and rural terrain. This is what makes Washington wary, the prospect of a drawn-out conflict with no clear front lines, where every village and every city block could become a battlefield. Venezuela has also integrated mobile air defense units into the drills, deploying short and medium-range missiles at locations that can shift constantly. State media footage shows tanks rolling through the night, rocket artillery simulating naval interceptions, and soldiers marching through Venezuela's dense jungle terrain, all painting a picture of a nation not merely training, but genuinely preparing for war. President Maduro appeared among the troops, his voice firm. "We will defend the homeland on every terrain and under all conditions." That statement made the entire Latin American region pause, with a mix of apprehension and a reluctant sense of admiration. This is a country that has endured crisis after crisis, faced sanctions, faced isolation, and yet still stares down the world's greatest superpower with defiance. It was no surprise when Russia immediately spoke up. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova declared that they stand with Caracas in defending its sovereignty. Just a short sentence, but one that made it unmistakably clear. The Caribbean is no longer a two-player game between the US and Venezuela. It has become a geopolitical chessboard where Washington and Moscow are now testing each other's moves. Russia's public backing has complicated the situation immensely because now any US military action risks escalating beyond the region. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the atmosphere is heating up as though standing at the edge of a precipice. Roads leading to the sea are under military control, radar systems are operating nonstop, and helicopters are patrolling the skies with increasing frequency. The people, already accustomed to political and economic upheaval, are now sensing something different, a mounting tension, the sense that the country could be dragged into full-scale conflict at any moment. All of this raises a critical question for the world. Has the United States fully considered the consequences of pushing this crisis to the brink? Is this simply a show of strength, or is it the first step in a campaign with a real and pressing objective? But before the world can even begin to answer those questions, another signal has emerged, one that comes not from Caracas, but from within America's own camp: doubt among its allies. And that, dear viewers, is when the story begins to take a new turn, where the first cracks don't appear in Venezuela, but among those who were supposed to stand firmly at Washington's side. In any military or paramilitary campaign, international credibility is one of the most vital shields a nation can wield. But this time, that shield, America's global reputation, is showing troubling cracks. When Washington announced it would ramp up its anti-drug operation in the Caribbean and deploy the USS Gerald R. it expected strong backing from its closest allies, especially the United Kingdom, a nation with multiple overseas territories in the region and a key member of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance. But London's response came as a stark contradiction to those expectations. Instead of standing shoulder to shoulder, the UK announced it would pause its intelligence sharing related to the operation, stating that it does not wish to be drawn into potentially controversial military actions. This wasn't just a refusal, it was a warning, a reminder that even America's closest allies are seeing signs of trouble. The world immediately began to ask, if this mission is truly transparent and purely focused on combating drug trafficking, why is the UK, America's most time-tested strategic partner, taking a step back? Could there be objectives beyond the official narrative? London's cautious silence, combined with disturbing images of attacks that have left dozens dead, has stirred growing skepticism across the international stage. Human rights organizations are speaking out, political analysts are questioning the operation's legitimacy, and across Latin America, many governments suspect Washington may be using a familiar pretext to expand its military influence. In this context, Venezuela's large-scale military drills have only drawn more attention. Countries across the region are watching every move closely. Many South American leaders fear that a direct clash between the US and Venezuela could plunge the entire region into chaos, shattering the already fragile balance of power in Latin America. That's why, even if no one dares to publicly criticize the United States, nations like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico have all adopted a cautious stance, refusing to openly support Washington, but also steering clear of aligning with Caracas. Instead, they remain silently observant because they understand that one misstep from either side could set the Caribbean ablaze. Even within the United States, there are voices of concern. Several politicians and experts warn that the U.S. may be walking into a high-risk game, clear rewards. While these opinions may not be strong enough to alter the administration's policy, they do add to the growing divides surrounding Operation Ford. All of these cracks, the hesitancy from allies, the region's tense silence, and America's own internal debates, have made the anti-drug campaign murkier and more unpredictable than ever. Few now believe that Washington's goals stop at simply dismantling drug networks. And as doubt spreads, a more critical question begins to surface. Where is this confrontation between the United States and Venezuela actually headed? That's when we must look deeper into the scenarios that lie ahead. The crossroads where even a single misstep from either side could send the entire region spiraling into dangerous, uncharted territory. When we step back and take in the bigger picture, it becomes clear that the confrontation between the United States and Venezuela is far from a fleeting crisis. It is the convergence point of many interests, deep-seated fears, and ambitions that stretch far beyond what is currently unfolding on the surface of the Caribbean Sea. And like every clash between a superpower and a nation that has long found itself in the crosshairs, there are multiple paths forward, each leading to vastly different outcomes. The first scenario, considered by many observers as the most likely, is one where tensions remain high but stop short of erupting into open conflict. In this version, the U.S. continues its carrier deployment, destroyer patrols, and maritime surveillance under the banner of anti-narcotics efforts. Venezuela, in turn, maintains its military exercises, troop movements, and strong declarations of sovereignty. The two sides engage in a tense standoff, but neither makes the first move. On the surface, this might seem like the most peaceful option, but in reality, it harbors the danger of indefinite tension. The Caribbean, one of the most vital trade corridors in the Western Hemisphere, would be blanketed by a persistent sense of unease. And any slip-up, a misunderstood radio signal, a misdirected aircraft, a patrol vessel refusing inspection, could bring that fragile balance crashing down. The second scenario is one that military experts fear the most: a minor incident with the power to ignite a major conflict. A drone is shot down, a Venezuelan Coast Guard ship is accused of being uncooperative, a maritime chase accidentally turns into an exchange of fire. Any of these could spark an uncontrollable escalation. With an American aircraft carrier present, even the smallest tactical misstep could be interpreted as a hostile act. And when tensions are already at a boiling point, it becomes nearly impossible for either side to remain calm in the face of provocation or unintended error. In this scenario, the confrontation could quickly escalate into limited skirmishes. Venezuela activates its coastal artillery, or air defenses, and the U.S. responds with targeted airstrikes. These clashes may be contained in scope, but the domino effects they unleash could spiral out of control. Once blood is spilled, both sides would face enormous domestic pressure to respond proportionately. From there, events could snowball into a prolonged conflict, something neither party originally wanted. The third scenario, and the most dangerous, is that the U.S. decides to expand its campaign with a blockade, increased pressure, or more aggressive operations designed to destabilize Venezuela. If Washington concludes that Caracas is allowing drug cartels to operate freely, it could opt for stronger measures, establishing offshore control zones, ramping up armed surveillance, or launching special operations against targets it deems to be the root of the problem. For the U.S., these might be seen as tactical escalations, but for Caracas, they would represent violations of sovereignty, just cause to respond with full military force. And with Venezuela already mobilized for modern guerrilla warfare and backed by widespread Bolivarian militias, any U.S. intervention risks triggering a long, unpredictable, and grinding conflict, a scenario Washington is unlikely to welcome after its hard-earned lessons in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. What makes this even more troubling is that Venezuela is not standing alone. Behind it is Russia, and Moscow's public support is more than symbolic. It's a warning. Any U.S. military action will be closely scrutinized by another great power. That transforms the Caribbean into more than a regional dispute. It becomes a proxy battleground, a Cold War echo where every maneuver is watched as a test of resolve. In this light, the Caribbean is no longer just a destination for sun-drenched holidays. It has become a strategic choke point, one that could reshape the security landscape of the entire Western Hemisphere, and perhaps even beyond. What's most alarming isn't the aggression of one side, but the unyielding posture of both. When a superpower is determined to assert dominance, and a smaller yet defiant nation is equally determined not to bow, every possible scenario becomes brittle. And in the murky uncertainty of these scenarios, the world can only watch each rising wave in the Caribbean, wondering, is this merely a test of strength or the quiet warning signs of a coming military storm beneath deceptively calm waters? The Caribbean is holding its breath, because with just one small decision, one miscalculation, the entire region, and perhaps the world, could be thrust into a new, uncertain chapter. The story unfolding in the Caribbean doesn't end with the sound of gunfire, but with a heavy stillness, like calm waters holding their breath before a storm. Massive aircraft carriers still loom just offshore. Military exercises continue, and strong, unyielding statements echo from both Washington and Caracas. It paints a picture where peace feels like a thin mist, barely concealing the powerful currents surging beneath the surface. Venezuela may be militarily weaker than the United States, but it possesses what every nation holds on to when threatened: the will to survive. It has mobilized nearly 200,000 troops, deployed modern guerrilla tactics, and received quiet yet firm backing from Russia. All of this signals one clear message: they are prepared to resist any intervention, no matter the cost. On the other side, the US is not acting solely in the name of a drug war. It's acting to defend strategic influence, to send a message to rivals, and to uphold the security umbrella it has cast over the Western Hemisphere for decades. But in doing so, Washington also faces risks it cannot fully control: the threat of unintended escalation, hesitation from allies, and unpredictable reactions from other global powers. Today, the Caribbean feels like a flat, glassy sea, waiting for the wind to rise. No one knows whether the storm will come, or if things will simply settle down after a few tense weeks. But one thing is certain: any disruption here could ripple outward, reshaping the security architecture of the Americas, and potentially influencing the global order that's shifting more each day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us through to the end of this analysis. If you have thoughts, perspectives, or insights on the US-Venezuela standoff, we invite you to share them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you, and if you enjoy in-depth, thoughtful breakdowns like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the stories to come. Thank you, and we'll see you again in the next analysis.